Good evening, and welcome to the February 2019 edition of League of Women Voters Presents, the monthly public affairs show about issues important to Columbia, mid-Missouri, and beyond. Tonight, there are some issues that you're guaranteed to get a response if you talk to people in Columbia about. One is the weather. If you ask people about the weather, they'll tell you about the snow and the ice and how it's so cold. And so the other issue is housing, and they'll talk about all the apartments that are being built and the school boundaries that are changing and how that's going to affect housing. So everybody has some thoughts about housing, and tonight we're going to tackle an issue that's very important to the community and sometimes doesn't get the attention it needs. So we're happy to give it that attention. And I have two terrific experts to talk about what's been going on here in Columbia. The issue is fair housing. And I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves. So, Susan?
My name is Susan Mays. I am a member of the Columbia Community Land Trust Board, and I'm the president of the North Central Neighborhood Association.
Hi, and I'm Phil Steinhaus. I'm CEO of the Columbia Housing Authority.
All right. So maybe first we could start with you just telling us, just briefly kind of describe what your organization does in Columbia. And Susan, maybe you can start.
Okay, the Columbia Community Land Trust is an organization that builds and could remodel homes to sell to people of limited means. People between 50 and 80% of the federal income guidelines, which is roughly $40,000 a year for a single person, and it goes up the more members that are in the household. These homes, the Land Trust builds, they work with the city, the Housing Programs Office. They build the homes. Other organizations around the city build the homes as well. And then we will sell it to someone who is income qualified to be in there. They own the home, they don't own the land underneath. That is to keep the equity in the home. So when you move 5-10 years later, this home stays affordable. So we're building up affordable housing stock throughout the city that will stay affordable.
And just maybe explain that part about you own the house but not the land and how that keeps it affordable.
Well, part of it is that building a new home costs around $150,000. You can do it a little bit cheaper, a little bit more expensive, but in that general vicinity. So keeping the land allows us to maintain that so that the house is what we're selling, so we're keeping the equity there.
Okay.
So the land is owned by the Land Trust, and we work with the homeowners throughout the time, and you can stay there as long as you'd like. But if you move, you can't rent that back out. It has to be resold at an affordable price.
Okay. And how many homes do you do a year, or how many are out there?
At the moment, we're just getting ready to sell our 7th home.
Okay.
So this has been going on for 2 years. We are doing our 7th home. We have plans for another 8 homes in the next year and a half or so.
Next year and a half. And are these all kind of the same? 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, or?
There's a variety. It's 2-bedroom, 1-bath to 3-bedroom, 2-bath right now. And the ones we have now, the new development we're building on North 8th Street, Cullimore Cottages, will also be 2 to 3 bedrooms. So.
Okay. All right. So Phil, tell us about what you do.
Well, the Columbia Housing Authority was formed in 1956 as part of Columbia's urban renewal effort. The Columbia Housing Authority now owns 717 units of affordable housing. About half of those are between our 2 towers, Oak Towers, which serves the elderly, and then Pequin Towers, which serves elderly and persons with disabilities. And then we have our downtown family sites, and we have a family site out on Alita Boulevard called our Bear Creek Apartments. And so the other major program we have is called the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. And we have about 1,200 vouchers there that allow people to rent in the private market. People in public housing or Section 8 pay 30% of their adjusted household income for rent, and then the balance is made up through a subsidy provided by the Housing Authority. We receive that subsidy from the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
And those are all apartments now we're talking about?
Right. Someone on Section 8 could also rent a single-family home.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But we don't really have any single-family homes in public housing property. Most of them are duplexes and fourplexes. And then, of course, our two towers. So one of the exciting things that we've been doing is since 2014, we've been working on renovating all 717 units of public housing. And so we're finishing up one of our final projects, our Bryant Walkway Apartments, which will be done this summer. When we complete those, we'll have renovated 597 units of public housing. And so we've gone in and done major rehabs to all those properties, making them more energy efficient, improving the interiors, replacing plumbing, electrical systems, appliances, new flooring, new lighting, new cabinets, etc. And so they're just like new homes. And so we're pretty excited about it because we're the first housing authority in Missouri to be approved for this program. And it really allows us to address a lot of issues with our aging housing property that we're just not getting funding from HUD to do so. So we're pretty excited about being able to give our residents new homes that are energy efficient, because the affordable housing equation is rent plus utilities. And so based on your income, if you can only afford $200 in rent, you can't afford $300 in utility bills. So it's an important thing that we're trying to do. So we have 120 units left to do. We're optimistic we can get those done in the next 3 or 4 years.
Wow. So then that would be all of them, or
Right.
up to date. And you started in 2014. Yeah. So that's pretty good progress.
Yeah. The other focus that we have is the housing authority is much more than housing. Okay, we cannot afford to warehouse people in poverty. We have an affordable housing crisis in our community. There's just not enough. We have long waiting lists for all our programs. And so we have a big resident services department that focuses on helping youth enter and succeed in school and go to a career, to help families work towards family self-sufficiency, and to help the elderly and persons with disabilities live as independently as possible and prevent premature institutionalization. And so with those efforts, we're able to kind of move people up and out. Our slogan is move in, move up, move out. And so that's really what we want to do, is we want to be a transformational agency that gives people an opportunity to break the cycle of poverty.
And so you have long waiting lists, and the additional services you provide, how do you find out who to provide those to?
Well, we have 2 resident services coordinators that work with our properties. We have housing managers that are also in tune with what our residents need. We also have 2 family self-sufficiency coordinators that work with our family self-sufficiency program, which provides incentives for people to return back to work and increase their income. We also have a program funded by the county called Healthy Home Connections, where we have Healthy Home Connection family support specialists that work towards creating emotionally healthy families.
So that runs the whole gamut, doesn't it?
Right.
Not just a roof over your head.
No. We have Moving Ahead program, which is an after-school program. We serve 100 kiddos down there at the Blind Boone Center. They get it's strong academic focus. They get a full meal every day, and they develop great partnerships with their mentors and their tutors, and it works really well for those kiddos. We have our Money Smart program, which is a 10-week financial literacy program. We just have lots and lots of services, and we'll either provide them directly or we will partner with other agencies. So we have great partnerships with like Big Brothers Big Sisters. We have a food pantry, so we have a partnership with the food bank. We have a partnership with Services for Independent Living to provide transportation to our high-rise residents, and I could go on and on.
Yeah. Okay, so well, that's terrific. So let's look at what's going on today. I mean, what do you see as the biggest challenges for? You mentioned that it's kind of a crisis. We have long waiting lists. What are some of the biggest issues or challenges right now to affordable housing in Columbia?
Well, as of right now, there are over 14,000 households in Columbia that are spending more than a third of their monthly income on housing. And so that is people that are bringing home $2,000, $2,500 a month with a, fairly low, medium to low wage job. and are spending $1,200 a month on rent.
Do you know how many households there are?
In Columbia, there's something, what, 40 something, 50 something
Wow.
thousand?
So that's a
I'm
big
making
chunk.
that, yeah, it's a big chunk. So we need 14,000 affordable homes. And the Land Trust, we're talking about people that can afford a $700 a month house payment around. So, but then there's people that can't afford $200 a month for rent or whatever. So the variety of the lack is huge. And it spans the gamut from homelessness, people that are unhoused, people that are living with relatives or sleeping on their friends' couches, to people that are spending, 2/3 of their income on their rent. So how do we do that? So,
How do we get to 14,000
yes.
places to live? Because and I assume we're not that close to that.
Well, the Land Trust has been in existence this is our 3rd year, I believe, and we're just doing our 7th house. We have plans for about 10 more over the next 18 months, but that's 18 in 5 years.
Right.
That's
So let's see, if we do the math, well, we don't want to do the math.
I was going to say I don't want to do the math
Yeah,
on that one, but
yeah.
yes, we're not meeting the need.
Yeah. And so the authority's been around since the 1950s.
Right.
So relative to various other points in time, how does it look right now in terms of affordable housing?
Well, as far as the housing authority is concerned, I think we're in the best shape we've ever been in.
Good.
We've renovated 597 units. Crime is extremely low in public housing, contrary to what popular myth is. My philosophy is if you give people an opportunity to make good choices, they're more likely to make good choices than bad choices. And so that's why we provide this plethora of services to folks and give them those opportunities to make good choices. And I think we have very strict crime-free housing addendum because we know poor families want to live in safe housing. They don't want to worry about that their kids can't go outside and play in the yard.
Right.
They don't want to be disturbed by all sorts of disturbances and problems in the neighborhood. And so I think if you look at the crime map, it would uphold what I'm saying, as it will show there's really very little crime in public housing as compared to what it was back in the 70s and 80s. So we serve people that are at or below 50% of the median family income. And most of the people that we serve are at or below 30% of the median family income. Our average household income is about $10,000 a year. So you can imagine trying to live on that. It's pretty tough. Yeah. So what we'd like to see in the community is more diverse neighborhoods. What we know is when you concentrate the poorest of the poor all in one area, they don't fare as well as when they are in more diverse neighborhoods. And so that's one of the issues kind of with fair housing in our communities. We tend to segregate ourselves economically in our neighborhoods. And so we go to school or we work in diverse communities. We have a lot of diversity in our school setting or in our work settings, but then we go home and we segregate ourselves economically by our neighborhoods. And so that's a difficult thing to try to overcome. And in the past, these are built on patterns in the past where there was things like redlining and steering, and where African Americans couldn't even rent or live in certain neighborhoods, and they couldn't buy homes in neighborhoods. We were talking earlier about George Brooks and his wife formed a neighborhood that's right behind the Forum Theater there at West Boulevard and Stadium up on top of that bluff. That was the first place where they had black homeowners in Columbia, and they bought some land, and that was they did it because there wasn't any other place where they could actually purchase property and build a home for themselves. And so we end up with these patterns in our community where we end up with segregation based around housing patterns, and fair housing addresses those issues.
And so let's talk a little bit about that diverse community, the diverse neighborhood kind of. That's probably a problem in many places.
It is.
Not unique to Columbia.
No.
But is there any movement in changing that, or are there things that you think would help bring about some improvement?
Well, we see some changes. One of the ideas that is being implemented in other communities is called inclusionary zoning.
Okay.
And so when you have the development of someone comes to the city with plans for a new subdivision, the city requires that 10% of that housing be within a certain affordability level. And it doesn't mean that you have to have an expensive house, a poor house, an expensive house, or an affordable house, not poor, but that you can make that development in such a way that you've got some affordable housing stock there.
Mm-hmm.
Another idea I'd like to see implemented is that every time the school district buys land to build a school, that they set aside 20 acres of land next to that school specifically for affordable housing development. Because what happens is every time you build a new school, all the land value around that goes up, and you see the more expensive homes go in closer to the school, and the poorest people live farthest away from the school.
Now, are there other places that do that?
I don't know.
Oh, well, that could be the genius of the moment here. And then the inclusive zoning, is that something that's already happening in Columbia?
No, it has been discussed by Councilman Thomas, and I think it's being discussed in several circles, but it's kind of controversial. It has been adopted by other communities, and so it's not necessarily a new concept, but it'll probably take a little while to get community support, I would guess.
I think Boulder, as of now, because they have such a hard, nobody can live in Boulder except for the very wealthy. So they have such a terrible affordable housing thing. I think theirs is 20% now for inclusionary. If you're going to build a subdivision in Boulder, 20% of it has to go to affordable housing.
Yeah, I think it seems like there's many communities, there's Seattle has made the news with some of the ideas they have. So it seems like there's more and more attention. I don't know if there's a lot of solutions out there, but it sounds at least like, making incremental progress is what we're going to have to do, right?
Right.
And for example, renovating the apartments, making them nicer,
Right.
has to lead to, something good, right? And,
Right.
And so you have to approach that one policy at a time, one idea at a time.
Sure, absolutely. And, the way we looked at it is if we don't preserve our current affordable housing stock, it starts to disappear. We're going in the wrong direction. And so we could be building new, and that's why we kind of abandoned some other initiatives we had to build some new housing, is when we saw the opportunity to renovate our public housing stock. Is like, this is the opportunity to preserve this important resource for our community. And we're rather lucky because public housing was built along the Flat Branch Creek down there. It used to run right down Providence Walkway, and so that was some of the poorest housing stock in the community. And so where public housing is actually located is in a great location. It really is. Close to downtown, close to the university, Columbia College. It's goods and services, transportation, etc. But in some communities, it was on the wrong side of the tracks. And so in Columbia, it made sense to renovate our current stock rather than tearing it down and building somewhere else.
And I guess, at some point you had to, now you got a federal grant to do the renovations, right?
Low-income housing tax credits, both state and federal.
And so talk a little bit about how you do have those decisions you have to make about allocating your budget and where the money does come from for the housing authority.
Well, the Housing Authority gets operational funds for its public housing. Those operational subsidies every year. So remember, our tenants pay 30% of their adjusted household income for rent, right? And so then the balance is made up through a subsidy from HUD. But HUD doesn't fully fund the subsidy every year, and it fluctuates. So some year we'll get 70%, some year we'll get 80% what we're supposed to get. And so going out to investors to try to be competitive for tax credits, the investors look at that and say, you don't have a stable source of income. We don't know what's going to happen 5, 10, 15 years from now. We want to see, just like if you went to buy a home, they want to know what's your job, how much income
Can you
got.
pay it back?
They want to
Yeah.
look whether or not you can pay it back. And so the RAD program actually converted those subsidies, locked them into a long-term contract rent with what's called project-based vouchers. So That's getting a little bit into the weeds there, but essentially we're guaranteed a certain amount of rent for every one of those units, a certain amount of subsidy. So now we can be competitive for those tax credits, because I have to develop a 20-year pro forma which shows here's what we expect to take in revenues, and we have to calculate in what's our occupancy rate, what's our vacancy loss, what are all our replacement costs, etc. And so then we have to prove that we have 1.2 debt service coverage ratio for those investors who buy the tax credits that are awarded to us. And so that's been really a godsend to us, because we haven't, housing authorities in the past have not been able to compete for tax credits. And so that's...
And so now, so kind of part of that is taking out the big up and down, trying to
Right,
flatten
exactly.
out the budget. But does some of the budget go to building new?
It could. It could.
So now you guys are built 7, you got 8 on the
On the list, yeah.
on the drawing board. How about the housing authority?
Well, we still have 120 units left to renovate.
So that's the focus.
That's the focus now.
Okay.
Before we were approved for this rental assistance demonstration program, we acquired a piece of property just north of Oak Towers, and we had a project there for a 3-story building with 42 units in it. And that was approved by the city. We submitted for funding, but it didn't get funded.
Submitted it to,
Missouri Housing Development Commission
Okay.
for low-income housing tax credits.
so that's the state government money, okay.
Right, it's federal and state credits, and it's a very competitive program. So normally they get about 130 applications, and about 30 are funded statewide. So you can see that you really have to have a good competitive proposal, and sometimes you have to reapply year after year for several years in a row before you get funded. We didn't resubmit that one because we got approved for the RAD program the next year. And so that's when we started submitting applications to renovate our public housing properties. We also submitted an application to build the Patriot Place apartments out on the east end of the business loop at that time too. So that was not public housing, but that was new housing. We created 25 one-bedroom apartments for homeless veterans out there.
So some of the growth comes in kind of the Section 8 program of finding more private homes that can be used for this?
Well, they're not really awarding any additional Section 8 vouchers. The additional Section 8 vouchers that we've received are what's called VASH vouchers, Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing vouchers. And we have 125 of those vouchers, and they go for homeless veterans that are referred to us from the Truman VA. And for every 25 veterans, the Truman VA gets a full-time case manager to provide supportive services to those veterans, because if they're homeless, they're also going to need some support. You can't just put them in a house and expect, okay, now all your problems are fixed, right? And so that's really the only expansion we've seen in that program.
Okay.
When we finish our 120 units of public housing, we're not going to stop. We're going to continue on to build new affordable housing. And when I took over 13 years ago, I kind of said to myself and to the staff at the agency, you know, if the Housing Authority isn't a leader in affordable housing in Columbia, what are we? You know, right?
Right, that's right.
So we have to be, and we provide more affordable housing than anybody else in the community.
Yeah. So what's your pitch to folks, you know, that you need all this housing out there? We're kind of trying to figure out how to solve this problem. What do you say to the folks that are in positions to decide maybe some of these solutions?
Well, one of the things that if you talk to people that are running elementary schools, one of their biggest problems is students that move mid-school year. If you move from one school to another school, you're 2 months behind. And so you get that caught up, and I can't remember the percentage. Do you remember the percentage, Phil? It's a ridiculous number,
Right.
but it's something like a large percentage of children are moving schools 3 or more times a year.
Wow.
Because they're in unstable housing.
Because they're in unstable housing. And so if you lose your job, or you're staying with a relative for 2 months here, and then you go to that school, and then you get your parents get an apartment, and you move to that place, and it's on and on. And so those children are getting further and further and further behind. And so it's one of those situations of we all benefit for providing parents who are working and trying their best to do it, but finding a place to rent in this town for less than $1,000 is very difficult.
Right.
And so if we can provide support in the housing area so that, okay, that's one thing I don't have to worry about. I don't have to worry about my rent going up or things, happening or having a fight with my cousin or whatever.
Right.
Then that's one problem we can assist with. Okay, here's the stability. The kid gets to go to the same school and he has the same teachers and he has the same social network around them to be supportive.
But how do we do that? I mean,
How do we
how
do
do we
that?
provide that support? I mean, if we could do the build a new elementary school that's years in the making.
Absolutely,
It is.
yeah.
But what are there things now that we could do? We should be thinking about, or we could.
Well, one thing we've been working with the city on is we've been working on with the city about trying to improve rental or energy efficiency in rental housing. So remember, the affordable housing equation is rent plus utilities, and so a lot of the rental properties that are older are less energy efficient. And there's really no incentive for landlords to make them more energy efficient because the tenant's paying the bill.
Right.
Right. So why should I buy a new furnace that's more energy efficient when the tenant's paying the bill? And so one of the things we have, a program we have right now with the city is called Enhance Your Attic. And it's a program with the city that provides some rebates and incentives to landlords to add extra insulation to their attic. And it specifically targets landlords that are participating in the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. But what we'd really like to see is some energy efficiency codes implemented for rental housing. So rental housing has to meet a certain level of energy efficiency. And that not only benefits the tenant because they're paying less for that, it makes housing more affordable, but it decreases the demand on our whole electrical grid. It reduces the carbon footprint in our community. It has a lot of additional effects there, and so kind of the uphill battle there is convincing landlords that it's a good investment in your property to make it more energy efficient, and we're going to try to encourage you to do that.
Yeah, I mean, but that's a great example because it sort of is a great example of your point, is that if you lowered the utility bill, maybe somebody's going to stay in that apartment longer for the whole school year instead of moving 3 times. And so it's some of those little things that can just lead to big impact. Even though that wasn't what you were, you're trying to save them money on utilities, but look at over here what happened, and so, and we probably could go through a number of those things, but we're running out of time. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for joining me tonight, and it was great conversation. It's really important issue, and I appreciate you being here, and. That's all for tonight, and we'll see you next month.